Welcome to What the Force, and welcome to What the Force Happened on Rebels. And I'm Marie-Claire, your host, and with me today is James.
Howdy, folks. How's it going out there?
And today we're going to be reviewing reviewing and kind of just discussing the two latest episodes of Star Wars Rebels, Wolves at the Door and A World Between Worlds, which aired originally on February 26th, 2018. And we are 3 episodes now that these are done, from the end of the whole thing, which is, next week we see 3 episodes, which is really crazy to say. To start out, James, what did you think of these 2 episodes?
I was really torn on them. There was a huge amount of insight and a huge amount of character development, I would say. So I kind of was torn because, we came from such a fantastic mid-season opener to this. I don't want to say it was a letdown, but it was different pace than I was expecting. Because now let's go with this one. I loved them. It just took me a moment to realize that I did.
I felt very similarly that these were slower. Like it took almost an entire episode of kind of sneaking and approaching to get them to like the meat of what they needed to kind of do, which was in the Worlds Between Worlds. And the Worlds at the Door was really them, just the journey to get there, right?
Yeah.
And so it felt slow to develop, but the impact of what was presented was quite significant. And actually, I want to talk about a little bit about kind of the reaction that people have had about these 2 episodes out there in the interwebs a little bit, because I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff that people have been saying.
Let me use my telepathic powers. Oh my God, that sucks, Ors. I can't believe the word I'm not going to use for the podcast.
No. Actually, people are really loving this. And...
Oh, I read the opposite. I didn't use my telepathic powers.
Okay,
people hated this.
Well, I think that people are catching on to something that is quite significant, which is, love it or hate it. It is telling the Star Wars stories, and I accept them for what they are and how they tie into the bigger meaning, right? What I've been reading is a couple of things. So 2 things. One major thing is, oh my God, we've just changed the whole Star Wars universe. Where do we go from here? And I'm going to reply to that one in a second. But the second one is, wouldn't it be nice if the rest of the Star Wars universe had as much guidance as Dave Filoni gives Rebels?
Oh, Dave Filoni is my hero. I'm sorry, but if that guy releases anything, I will be watching it. That guy is amazing.
I'm going to argue just briefly against both of those points, since this is like the podcast that I run and I have a free moment to do that, which is, first, it doesn't change anything because the Force is the Force and we have no known limits to the Force.
I'm going to come in on this. It is changing it, but it's not changing it quite the way, like everybody has a perceived. I'm going to totally steal this. How did that go? Well, Jedis, they can, use the Force to lift things and move things and laser swords. That's all anybody's ever known about the Force. Now, you, myself, and probably a lot of the listeners are very different than 99% of the people out there. Mm-hmm. We know more. In this episode, not in this episode, in the next episode, part 2, we see Sith magic in use, and that's something that's never been seen in the air quotes canon.
Yeah, it's new, and some of this stuff is being pulled from legends. Like, we knew that there was a lot more to the Sith previously. There was a lot more, like, we've seen. Well, I don't know. We've seen the dark side use magic with Mother Tanzin in, like, Ventress's mother, and connected to Maul. We've seen the witches use magic. We've seen magic associated in the Clone Wars. There's been a lot more, like, in the side canon, and I think that they're going to explore that more. But The idea that this completely changes everything, I don't think that it does. I think what they're telling you is that the things that you assume you know, the things that you assume you know might not be the full picture of everything.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I agree totally with that. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to basically say the Force is not just that. I mean, something that I've heard on other podcasts is Jedi and Sith, they aren't the Force. They're religions. They are a
Yeah.
way of seeing the Force. They're an ideology.
We're reminded of that specifically because of the Mortis iconography that we see throughout the first episode, right? We were reminded of the father and the daughter and the son
Mm-hmm.
because they were force wielders, like basically that could control anything.
Yep.
So that's my first point, which is just because you haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it can't happen. And the second point is, okay, this is going to get a little ranty, so I apologize, James, that Lucasfilm, under the guidance of Kathleen Kennedy, doesn't know what they're doing. And that because Dave Filoni is in charge of Rebels, it's better. But let's remind ourselves of the first and second season. And these same critics said, ugh, it's another filler episode.
Filoni has said since the beginning of this series, there is no such thing as a filler episode.
But one would also argue that even though the rest of canon doesn't seem to be connected at this point, they have less episodes to tell their story. And they haven't gotten there yet. And people are just incredibly unable to be patient enough to let, like, especially the saga, like the most recent saga hasn't even finished yet. And they're judging Rian Johnson's Last Jedi and saying, oh, it's way out to lunch. We don't know yet. We don't know what the end of the story is. It's like that kid in A Princess Bride that stops the dad or the grandpa halfway through the story and says, ugh, is this story just about kissing? Like, you're making an assumption about the story and how awesome it's going to be or not before you've even heard the end of it.
Oh, exactly. I mean, from with this, well, my big worry with this one is there's 3 episodes left. That's not a lot of time to tie up these loose ends. I mean, they are starting now, but with 3 episodes left, especially with what we're about to talk about, folks.
Yeah. I've heard mostly positive reviews. You've heard some negative reviews of these 2 episodes, which is really interesting.
Well, I mean, it's the internet. The same people who are complaining about, Force Awakens being, oh, it's just a total rehash of the previous episodes, and then they completely flipped out over the next one, going, oh my God, it's too different. This isn't my Star Wars.
To me, it's like there's several points that I want to pull out, which is the Force connection that happened in The Last Jedi first happened with Ezra and Maul 2 years before The Last Jedi happened. So they were Dave Filoni, and I think that this has been documented, that Dave Filoni was in the room brainstorming with the story group and Rian Johnson to do with the story. As same with The Force Awakens. Dave Filoni's been in the background of the Star Wars Lucasfilm headquarters with his little notepad drawing pictures. He's there. It's not like he's not there, and it's not like he's not helping, and it's not like everybody at Lucasfilm hasn't been saying they've been telling the same story. And I'm going to get to that with something Dave Filoni said about the second episode once we get into that.
Okay. Well, there's one thing I'm going to note on this, and this is something that's very true with the latest set of Star Wars, and it's the movies, it's with the TV show, and it's with the video games, Battlefront 2. They are not.
It's all interconnected.
Yeah, they're not independent entities, and all the different parts talk, and they've discussed it. I mean, if you find out about this, you're going to see an Easter egg from Battlefront 2 that shows up in The Last Jedi. We saw in Rogue One, we know what's going to happen to Hera and the Ghost and Chopper. For everybody else, it's a good question.
Yeah, it's not like they're not talking, and it's so coordinated, the stuff that they're pulling into Vader 2017 is brilliant, and it covers the Inquisitors, and it just expands on the story. And that's my argument for people that really see this as some sort of letdown on the rest of the saga and the properties that are telling this story. No, it's one story. Just because you can't see all the pieces yet doesn't mean it's not making a picture.
And yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I fully admit this one threw me for a loop when I first watched it. Couldn't decide if I liked it or not, because I'm like, this is not what I was expecting. Then
it was very spiritual.
And it sounds like it's about a good time to actually start talking about the episode. What do you think?
Yeah, so the first one is Wolves at the Door, and we start out, with
a spoiler, folks. Please be aware, we're about to do another spoiler cast.
Yes, let's talk about the spoiling. Well, we kind of talked about some of the spoiling before, but this is very spoilery, and especially if you love certain characters a lot.
Yeah.
like I do.
Okay, so where do we start?
Okay, so we start out with the rebels basically making plans to go to the temple. They don't know how they're going to get there because they don't have a ship. And Ezra says, well, we got these Loth wolves.
That actually led to probably my biggest laugh of the episode.
I know exactly what it is, and I gotta walk you through my brain logic on this one, and you're gonna laugh because I'm gonna be like, oh, there we go.
Well, you tell me yours first, and I'll tell you mine if they're different.
Okay.
Okay.
So Ezra goes out and summons the Loth wolves, and the Loth cat is jumping all over the Loth wolf at the beginning, which is super cute. But they all decide to trust Ezra, and he's summoning the Loth wolves, and the music is super dark and creepy. I actually wanted to call that out, that it was very ominous. There was a lot of low rumbling, and we hear the characteristic Ezra using the Force. It's like a high whine almost whenever he uses the Force.
Okay, folks, everybody should be paying attention to her. Once you listen, you're not going to be able to
not hear it. Yeah. There's like a whine, and I wish I had brought it up in our Rebels recap, but it's from the very first episode, and it only seems to happen with Ezra. I don't think it happens with Kanan or with Ahsoka, because we're supposed to view Rebels from his perspective. And then there's a low rumble, and the wolves appear, and everybody approaches the wolves. They're very cautious. Zeb actually freaks out. And I think to myself, and I thought this with the preview, is Chopper going to come with them? How are they going to carry Chopper? And the wolf that is carrying Zeb reaches down and like grabs Chopper with his mouth, and I burst out laughing.
That wasn't actually my laugh.
Oh,
that was another one. Yeah.
I was literally thinking, how are they going to carry Chopper? And then the wolf like grabs Chopper.
Well, I liked with Chopper's little protest, and as the wolf was running, you're hearing this. Actually, the part I liked was it sort of continues the family dynamic we sort of raised up in the last one.
Mm-hmm.
It's when Ezra and Zeb are talking, and Zeb's talking to the wolf, and he's like, and Ezra's like, that one doesn't talk. Zeb's like, he does with his eyes.
Yeah.
I'm like, that gave me a laugh, just because it's still the family dynamic we were bringing up in the last podcast.
So they travel across the plains, and the music changes to this very primal, I mean, I would say almost Native American, with like those sorts of sounds as they're on their wolves. It was striking to me, and it really felt old and primal. And then as they go, they literally sink into Lothal.
And then they're traveling through the Force. That part, I have to admit, I love the sound bites. Those are awesome.
Yeah, I call it hyperforce travel, because it's like hyperspace, but it's like through the Force, right?
Yeah.
And the wolves themselves are taking the team through the planet. They kind of end up a little disoriented when they arrive at the temple, and then they're there. This was when they were traveling in the sound bites. It was all important Kanan moments from season 1, which I thought was really interesting. It's like they're fulfilling his mission, or they're completing what he set out to do, finishing what he started, as it were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're going to find more about that in part 2 again.
You also hear, music-wise, when Kanan is speaking, these like chimes, and it's almost like and just after, as they arrive, almost like this wondrous type music. The music was in the wolves at the door was just fabulous. It definitely shows that the wolves have a deeper connection to the Force, that Lothal itself is very special, that many things in Lothal are interconnected. And certainly Azrav being from Lothal is almost like an avatar of its will.
That pretty much recapped more than I was thinking. I enjoyed it. When they're traveling through all those little Kanan moments, it was sort of eulogy for Kanan. It kind of felt like in there. It was, you sort of saw how he felt from the beginning to how he ended, because that's going to get covered in part 2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They arrive at the temple, and I was actually really struck by how modern, like nowadays, the excavation site of the temple looked. Like it looked like something that you would see, up north, excavating an area for, I don't know, something important, like resources or something. Like it was like there was these big machines, and there was these people with heavy equipment, and then there was these tents, and there was these things that were pulled out of the ground and very categorized.
Well, I'll give it this. This is just something that I really used to find very interesting. If anybody's ever watched an old, pop on YouTube and watch this. Anytime you've ever seen a classic building being moved, and I'm not talking a house. Think a castle moving in Scotland. They literally they go through everything. Everything comes apart. It all gets numbered. It all gets labeled without actually damaging anything, and they lay it all out to be transported somewhere.
You think that's what they were doing?
Well, that's exactly what they were doing. He was taking it apart to take back for study.
Oh, I didn't get that impression. I thought he was trying to just figure it out. But
well, I mean, if he can't figure it out on site, it's going back. It's got to be going somewhere. He's not going to leave it out there for anybody to find, especially with what it is.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, and they start to sneak in to the site, and we see this hilarious moment where Chopper gets to pretend to be Thrawn.
Yeah, that was
with a hollow projector, and he's just hilarious as an actor. I guess it's just really funny. They Sabine and Ezra sneak in. It's almost like Hera and Zeb and Chopper were there just as lookouts almost.
Yeah.
Sabine and Ezra steal scout trooper armor and sneak in, and Sabine is reading the iconography like a language, which I felt like was a really good add to her character, that she feels the meaning more than reads the meaning. Like it's not like a language, it's the feeling of the artistry, which is really very also primal, and how art is a very primal, connected to ourselves thing, almost very natural. It's one of the oldest forms of communication is artwork.
Well, I'm going to go to a little bit of a meta knowledge here, because this is kind of throws back to something I really like about this. That's something very, very important to the character Thrawn in this.
Mm-hmm.
Thrawn understands his enemies by understanding their art, and kind of makes you go, wait, military genius Thrawn? Sabine.
But I don't know that I really like Thrawn, and I like that concept, but it's almost like he's too intellectual about it. Like everybody's got to have their fatal flaw, right? And it's almost like he's too intellectual.
He's too pompous and too cocky. He knows everything, knows more than you.
We hear we see a new character called the Minister, who's played by the amazing Malcolm McDowell.
Oh, yeah.
Did you catch that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. I mean, instantly I was like, what is he doing here? And he describes the temple as the gateway.
Well, the moment I heard that, I'm like, wow, let's see. People are bouncing all through the planet. The gateway. Okay, I'm seeing something.
And he has been sent there directly by the Emperor to determine how to use it, how to get in there. And then we see finally the wall mural of the Mortis gods, and we find out a few really interesting pieces of information, which is the Jedi have countless pieces of history associated with the Mortis gods.
Well, that's their religion, and I mean, it's the Force incarnate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I got to say something about that. That artwork in and of itself to start with was absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I'm going to skip ahead because I got to point this one out. What's going to happen? What happens when Ezra unlocks the art. That is something that I don't think any other medium could have possibly done aside from 3D animation without looking a little overly cheesy. That was probably one of the most beautiful things I've seen in Rebels, and I've seen in any TV show in a very long time, when they unlock the art and they start moving, but they move almost like you'd expect art to move. Not, well, this is a picture of people, so they'll move like people. This was like a two-dimensional movement for these guys.
Mm-hmm. And they actually point out in the Rebels Recon that they used 2D animation to achieve that. And they actually hired a separate company to do that 2D animation, to give it, who specializes in that type of form of it, to give it that feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, that was, like I said, the most beautiful thing I've seen when that art came to life. Especially when all of a sudden the wolves look up, and it was still like it was still computer generated 2D, so it wasn't hand drawn, which looks very it fits, but it was different enough. You realize that that's different enough.
It was significant.
Yeah.
No, and the choice to have it be different gives it meaning.
And that's something I'm going to throw back to with Filoni. It's, they understand that, you know what, this isn't something we can do as well as they can. Maybe we should outsource it. And I mean, there's too many groups that will try to push things and make it happen and just do it. We've got the tech. Let's just do something.
Yep.
But stepping back and going, no, let's let the experts handle this one for us. That says a lot.
Yep. And the minister, well, going back to Ezra and Sabine looking at the mural, the minister goes and speaks with the Emperor, who is played by Ian McDermott, the Emperor himself. And his voice is just on point. Like it I don't know, like it gives me shivers. I had shivers this whole episode whenever he spoke. And he comments on the death of Kanan Jarrus, and it was like the Rebels writers wanted to have Ian McDermott say everybody's names, because they went through like Kanan Jarrus, Caleb Doom. Like it was like they wanted those characters to have Ian McDermott's like mouth form them or something, so they put them all into the script. But he comments that he was surprised that Kanan's death caused a disturbance in the Force that altered the fate of Lothal. So it seems like the Emperor, Darth Sidious, is able to actually kind of get a feeling of where things are going. And we know this from the original trilogy. The Emperor foresees things.
Well, it's every Force user can. It's a case of understand. It's not so much you see the final outcome, you see paths. I mean, Yoda, past, present, future, all is visible through the Force.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the thing I want to point out with this one is I really enjoyed this was when he mentioned that kind of was something for this tiny little annoying rebel cell of 5 people. They're this tiny little group was big enough that, one, they caused ripples in the Force, and 2, the Emperor knew who they were.
Yeah, and like maybe he didn't know first season, but he sure as hell knew by now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, you know, with Thrawn and with Vader and with all of these other people who have encountered them and they've managed to slip through their fingers, it's like, oh, you know, I'm going to have to squash this hard because this is not good. And the interesting thing, and I remember messaging you just as I heard this, because I was watching it at the time, and I was like, a conduit between the living and the dead is what is beyond the gateway. And I literally was like, what the Force is going on? Are we going this way? And that was my reaction, because I find it incredibly exciting.
Oh yeah, especially with when they got the gate to open, the fact that the wolves formed the gate, that kind of made, wow.
Yeah, and we find out that the minister's name is like Lord Haydn. And Sabine notices that it has to do with the wolves, and it has to do with where the hands are and how the hands move. She's guessing that it's probably the open hand of the daughter, which is to extend and open and start something rather than the closed fist, which is to end something of the sun, right?
Yep.
And so she says, okay, Ezra, you need to do your thing.
And I like the look he gave her.
I absolutely loved her line. And this is like a tongue-in-cheek poke at, I want to say it's Dave and the writing staff of Rebels poking the internet. It's art. Everything has meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And that was what that episode was. It was a case of, this isn't just a filler. We got stuff here.
Yeah, but it's like, it's more than that, because
Oh, yeah.
it's almost like they knew. And the next episode goes into it more, and it expands upon this. And this is why it's so interesting to see all of canon and everything that it's being said. And I think why it bothers me that, well, not bothers me, but I respectfully disagree that the story group knows what's happening. They man the ship. Each property runner kind of has their own take, and it iterates towards the whole. And that is the beauty of shared storytelling, not the downfall of it.
No, yeah, I agree with that.
This all ties back to some stuff that we've seen in earlier seasons. Whenever Ezra has gone into the temple, the gateway forms with the wolves as the father kind of moves his hand towards the sun and points, and the gateway forms with the wolves, back to that beautiful scene that you were just describing. And Ezra sees the portal form, and it ties back to, in the previous seasons, every time that Ezra has ended up in the temple, he has experienced the stars, this vast space between places.
Yeah.
And there is two versions of the Force that Jedi have referred to in the past. There is the living Force, which is represented by the wolves. And there is the big Force, which is more like the cosmic force, or the force of the universe. And it's almost like the living Force is what is happening now. And the cosmic force is the will of what will is and has been.
Interesting take on that.
And Ezra effectively goes into the cosmic force, which is very like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which is where Dave Filoni got his start. So I don't think it's a bad parallel to make. It's very Asian inspired, that you're going into this larger place that is bigger than yourselves, but you are one with it. It is one with you. It's back to Chirrut Inway's line in Rogue One. I am one with the Force is with me. And what can be better represented than going through a gateway into essentially the Force?
Yeah, that was, and that would actually be the end of the episode. All right, let's quickly jump on to part 2, because that was a good one.
Okay, part 2. So this one is called World Between Worlds, and that's where they go. He arrives through the portal, and we hear these voices, and I have a really good summary of them. And I'm not sure how much I should actually break down for you.
Past, present, future, all is visible through the Force.
Yes. Did you hear what they all were?
I didn't catalog them, but I paid very close attention to a lot. They had Alec Guinness, Carrie Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
They had stuff from episode 4, 5, I believe. They had some stuff from Rogue One. They even, if I'm not mistaken, they had some Obi-Wan from the Clone Wars in there.
Yep.
There was and Yoda. I mean, it basically was hey, let's just take bits and pieces out of everything Star Wars there is and throw it all together.
Yeah, I'm not going to drain this topic, but the start of it was fascinating, because it is apropos to the moment. So it starts out by saying Yoda's voice, truly wonderful, the mind of a child, and Obi-Wan's like, what place is this? It's almost like we're getting like Ezra reflection.
It's the cosmic force speaking to him. It's basically going, this is what you're thinking.
And we've seen this before with, the Yoda adventures at the end of the Clone Wars, where people were speaking to him in other people's voices. Qui-Gon says, a conduit through which the entire force of the universe flows. And that was from the Clone Wars with the Mortis episode. Luminous beings are we, Yoda. Not this crude matter. And then Ahsoka, just when you think you understand the Force, you find out how little you actually know. And then Yoda says, train yourselves to let go. And Obi-Wan says, what you need, you already have. Unfortunately, you seem to be letting it go of it all. And then Kanan...
I got to point one thing out with that. When you get done, I got to point out one thing about the Ahsoka quote.
Yeah?
It's strictly my opinion, but I think it's Filoni thumbing his nose. I'm going to apologize to anybody out there, but at the screaming throng of the fanboys who were saying, no, 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 you can't do that with the Force, especially about Episode 8, even though that's technically in the Jedi manual.
Yes.
And basically, they're saying we can do whatever we want to. The Force, there are no rules with the Force. It does what it wants, and it does, and we tell it what we want it to do.
Exactly. And the main point that I want to say is that there is this cacophony and overlapping voices, and actually parts of it pull out these kind of themes. And there's a very strong theory that is starting to form out there in the internet, and I'm going to go into it at some later date, but that there's the potential of reincarnation in the Star Wars universe. And they pull out a couple of quotes, and they're freaking out about these things, which is Kylo says, "Show me," and Rey says, "We will see each other again." Kylo says, "Grandfather." Rey says, "I believe that." Yoda says, "Let go." And then Kylo says, "I will finish what you started." And then it goes into like Hayden saying, "I will not lose you, Padme." And the daughter saying, "It's in his nature." And Maz saying, "The belonging you seek is ahead." And it's honestly like, it's just so interesting to see fans like grasp onto these things like with an iron tight grip. And I do think that they are laying the groundwork for something, whether I want to say what that is, but they're certainly saying time and space doesn't matter. People can come back from the dead, and the stories that have been told in the past will be told in the future.
I think they did basically, they're throwing a whole lot of breadcrumbs they can make use of later.
Exactly.
And thumbing there, and basically the big thing is them saying, you guys did not write the rules of the Force. Just because you've seen it done a certain way doesn't mean we can't change the rules on you midstream.
Yeah, and also, like Dave pointed out in the Rebels Recon, I love to remind everybody that everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
And he likes to put those things in there, right? And I think that that's what really hits some people, is that maybe they can't see that how everything is connected in the other properties so directly. But Rebels is for kids first and us second, and he needs to be a little bit more obvious in Rebels.
Yeah.
So Rebels is like the Cliff's Notes of Star Wars. Yeah, I think I'm right. But,
Oh, yeah. I'm going to wait. I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to wait and see how things play out.
I really found it super interesting to hear Malcolm McDowell say he's gone beyond the veil when he describes to Sabine where Ezra went in this episode. And, there's kind of a Sabine little mini side plot line where she's discussing with this minister how to get Ezra back and how to close the gateway and how to figure this stuff out. But it's not nearly as significant as Ezra wandering through the endless vastness of this space area, which they did incredibly well. It's not like they generated the whole universe in the computer. They generated the walkway that he was on and then did the rest with matte paintings to make it feel like it was endless. And they do these like little wonderful things where when he steps on the path, the almost
ripples,
and it almost makes like a little bit of a noise. It was just really wonderful.
I admit, when I saw that, I was thinking Tron. I heard the noise.
Yeah, and the Force theme plays as soon as he arrives through the gateway, which I'm almost immune to as well. We hear it so much. It is the conduit by which all time and space flows through, and he who controls it controls the universe.
Yep, and I mean, I like that when they did it. There's something about it that sort of, I've always took it as, that's not necessarily what it looks like, that's how Ezra was able to perceive it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Yoda, who had met him there previously when he was sitting on his log and it was the space area, said, "Is that what you see?" Mm-hmm. So I agree with you that this is how Ezra is connecting with the cosmic force. It's not necessarily that the cosmic force always looks this way. It could look like a meadow to Yoda. It could look like his Dagobah swamp to him. But Yoda has been there before. I'm sure other people have been there before, but it looks like this vastness of space. And I would probably say it's probably from Ezra touching the mind of the space whales and from his initial formation of thoughts in the temple. And it's just how he puts it into context. Because almost the cosmic force is too much for a mere human to wrap their head around without some sort of guidelines.
Well, I mean, there was an old show I used to like, but basically the way they described it was this is an attempt for a three-dimensional representation of a five-dimensional entity. And it was this weird shape-shifting thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was continually changing its dynamic, and that's because you can't really perceive it, but your brain goes, this is as best I can understand it, so that's all I need to see.
Mm.
And that's what I always took that view of the way Ezra was seeing it was as that. And I mean, yeah, Yoda sees it a different way. Obi-Wan probably would see it a different way if he was ever able to get up there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we hear the owl, the convery, hooting.
Yep.
And Ezra follows it to a gateway that looks like a triangle.
I'm sorry. You mean it looks like a holocron?
I don't know.
Perhaps if the color was slightly different, it would almost look like something somebody picked up somewhere a while back. I'm kind of drawing a blank here.
And he peers into the gateway and sees Ahsoka fighting Darth Vader.
No, come on. I mean, at that point in time, it's no longer Ahsoka fighting Darth Vader. It's Ahsoka fighting Anakin.
It's Ahsoka fighting Anakin. And that fight was so cool. It was so cool. She stabs her lightsabers into the ground. It starts cracking the ground. Now we know why Darth Vader was limping out of the temple at the end. And just as Anakin Darth Vader is about to slice her in half, Ezra freaks out, reaches out his hand, and pulls her into the gateway out of harm's way.
As we said at the beginning of the podcast, Ahsoka lives. I mean, Filoni said that for a while now, but I couldn't figure out how. I mean, that kind of fits. I mean, the sister is the owl.
Mm-hmm.
That's her icon. That's her iconography, and she basically directs him. The Force directs him to go do that because she knows what he's going to do.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm very much of the opinion that Ezra is not going to die. Now I feel like he's probably going to go more the path of Ahsoka and maybe follow her teachings. Like she's going to come back and maybe take him away somewhere, and it'll be more like Dave Filoni loves Lord of the Rings, so it'll be more like
going to the Silver Isles.
Yeah, I get this feeling that they'll like head off into space somewhere.
We got a week to wait, or sorry, 6 days to wait now.
6 days to wait. It's really fascinating hearing Sabine and the minister talk about the mural itself, and she's like, "Yeah, those are like the archetypes of the Force." Duh. Like it was just awesome. Like
I love the line where he said, "How did you discover? How did you figure this out?" I'm smarter than you.
Ezra and Ahsoka are kind of wandering around. They both get knocked out, but they figure it out, and they...
Well, I like her reaction first when she looks at him going, Ezra?
Yeah, you grew up. What happened?
She saw him like 3 seconds ago, and he was on the other side of the door with long hair, being, at the time, I believe, 15?
Yeah, and now he's probably 18.
And that was the look on her face was, she's trying to figure out what just happened because, despite the fact, anything can happen through the Force, sometimes when it happens, you're just like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it was so good to have her back, and she just adds like this richness to the story. I'm excited to see where her character goes next, honestly. Like I'm like, well, so she's there, we saw her, she was there, it all makes sense. It was a little Back to the Future type moment, but that's cool too. And Ezra realizes, oh, I have a chance to bring Kanan back. And this is like the shadow of greed, right? This is the Yoda like you cannot change. You can only move forward. You cannot change things that are meant to happen. And especially when that moment was him finding that peace and that moment to sacrifice himself when it made a difference not only to him but to kind of the universe at large.
And I mean, that's the one thing that's been a theme for an entire season was Ezra has an idea, and no matter what's going to happen, come hell or high water, I'm going to do this. This is the right thing to do. I have to do this. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's good or it doesn't matter if I do it, how I do it doesn't matter. This has to happen. And that was an entire theme of a season. When he was working with the holocron and working with Maul to try to learn a little bit of the dark side because he can turn it against them. I mean, what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly. And he finally understands with Ahsoka's assistance and really just Kanan, like remembering the sacrifice that Kanan made in his attempt. He could save him, but he chooses to finally let him go.
Well, he also understands that Ahsoka was saved. That it's kind of, this is the real mind bender, folks, because Ahsoka was saved because otherwise, Anakin would have walked out of there with her. That would have happened.
Yeah.
So Ahsoka didn't die in the temple, and now he knows why. But Kanan did die on top of the fuel cell. And if he did save him, what would have changed?
He might have died himself, right? Because they might have all been caught in the blast. Because Kanan pushes them away at that last moment.
It's the moment I'm considering may change. I think Ezra grew up.
Yeah.
Ezra finally became what he's been meant to be. He just went, no, Kanan knew best. Kanan knew what was going to happen. And this was Kanan's moment. He did this so that this could happen. And if I do this, I could potentially undo everything he did.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, at this point in time, the next thing we get is we hear a voice after he sort of goes, okay, I can't do this. Oh, yeah. And then you look through another portal, and there's somebody. Oh, you see, that's the point where I'm like, they reintroduce Sith magic.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Sith has been all about, like, in the books and stuff, and this is metadata outside of Legends, it's called now. The Sith weren't just Force users. They knew alchemy. It was the Star Wars book where the Emperor, how he came to be. Basically, one of the things that they've been doing with the Sith is they do alchemy. That was, one of the things that got introduced. That's how they created, Maul's brother.
Yeah, like there was the magic, the dark force magic on Dothamir.
And that was the mixing of potion. And then you see the Emperor with this giant cauldron of flame.
Yeah.
He's playing with Sith magic.
Yeah.
And that's how he opened a door in there.
He couldn't figure out how to get in there. I think that what was the problem was that he couldn't figure out, he could see in there, but he couldn't figure out how to get in there.
And I always took it this way as, okay, I'm going to go with the Jedi view from my point. As you reach a sort of higher state of enlightenment, you can sort of project your consciousness in there. That's sort of how Yoda does it, because he spends, there's not much to do in the swamp. Your days aren't busy.
And Ezra's been able to project his consciousness in there as he's expanded his understanding of the Force and his connection to it, but he's never been able to go there.
And it's always been he can see, he can catch glimpses, and I think that's what the Emperor's doing through his magics.
Yeah.
At least that was my interpretation of it, because, he released the Sith fire.
Yeah, and he was able to affect that area and go after Ezra, capture Ezra, and Ahsoka actually cuts, like, a fire...
Force fire tendril thing.
With her lightsabers, which was really cool, and they run away from the Emperor, who now sees Ezra and sees how powerful he has become, sees Ahsoka Tano, and Ian McDiarmid again gets to say their names, much to the writer's delight.
And that's why I wanted it. If you think about it like this, with a gateway, this is sort of the meta, my thinking of this. Could you imagine how powerful the Empire would be if a crack group of, let's say, adepts like the brothers and the sisters,
the Inquisitors, the
Inquisitors, the brothers and the sisters could enter through a portal and strike suddenly in the heart of the rebel base, and even if it's only a matter of you can use only the Force users can go in. And
it's not even that, it's also they can affect things in the past and potentially the future. I feel like that's what was being said.
Oh yeah, no, he can do a whole lot of things with this. And that's what he wants. This is There's a reason why the Jedi never used it. They probably discovered it. They probably figured it out. And they said, and we're going to forget about this now because this is too powerful to trust to anybody.
Yeah, and it's like the other weapons we've seen. We've seen the weapon on Malachor, right? This is something for understanding, but could be used as a weapon.
Yeah.
So knowledge, right? But also
Yep.
danger. And also, like in canon, we also know that the Emperor had a big investment in Jakku and had a lot of things happening there before the events of Battlefront, and like where the Star Destroyer graveyard is now, because there was a battle there because of his investment in Jakku. So it's like this is a big theme for him, is that he is constantly seeking out other sources of power and control.
Yep. The only thing you want with power is more.
Exactly.
Oh, I was just going to say the only way they could get away from him was
Yeah.
to get out of there, because he may not be able to enter, but through the Force he can certainly screw with them in there. Like, that's what he was doing.
Yeah. So he returns Ahsoka to the place that she is. The convoy goes with her, which I thought was super neat.
Yep.
And Ezra escapes back through the wolf portal, which...
Well, now we're going to skip back a little bit, because that's when they're waiting for him. How are they waiting for him is another funny scene.
Yes, that was wonderful. So they've arrested Sabine after she's kind of, been trying to decipher the art a little bit, and they go into one of the carriers, and you hear this knocking noise.
Yeah. After Zeb and Hera have been fiddling with something.
Exactly.
That was another one where Minister Hayden's face, he looks at her, he's like, "What's that?" She's like, "Sorry about the mess."
What? And everything goes awry as Chopper and Zeb and Hera save the day and rescue Sabine, running back to help Ezra, basically. After he comes through the portal, he has to close the portal, and Sabine gives him the answer, which is, well, the daughter opens and the sun ends.
Yep. Oh boy, does the sun end.
The sun ends. And so Ezra, uses his force powers on the sun's hand, the closed fist, and essentially it, closes the temple potentially forever.
And I mean, that once again, we're back to the beauty of the 2D art, when both the son and the daughter sort of slip below, the wolves leave, and then the father claps his hands. That was like it. I can't. People watch this scene, go back and watch it again, and just in awe of how pretty it is. And I mean, this is a kids show,
but it's not a kids show. I think we've proven that this is not a kids show any longer. It is storytelling that kids can get and kids can love, but it's for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, is this is not something where they needed to do it, but they went the extra mile because they could, and it did so much for the episode. I liked how they kind of made the escape on the excavator. Ezra and Hera at the end of Ezra's like, "Where are we?" She's like, "We're at the temple."
Yeah.
This giant excavation that had been dug up, and it was like something out of now I remember what it was. It's been bugging me for about a day and change now. It looked like a scene out of Indiana Jones.
First Indiana Jones, with the Ark of the Covenant and that whole excavation area with the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah,
and I mean, that's when it looked like a cross between the excavation, like I said, and something that they were cataloging to cart off and assemble back home.
Like, going into these two episodes, so they end up being safe, and Ezra says Kanan has one more lesson to teach and one more thing to fulfill, basically, and it's, I think what he's going to do is save Lothal.
That's going to happen. I mean, the fate of Lothal, and I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the new TIE Defender project isn't going to work out quite as planned, and they're going to have to go with Stardust. I know it's a stretch, folks. It's going to be very, very hard to believe this, because I mean, there's at least until a week from now, we'll know that I'm right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what can happen in the future. Yeah.
You should see the eye she's giving me, folks.
So we also, like, a couple of things I just kind of wanted to talk about from where I think it's going. I really think that the wolves and like Lothal itself, this like primitive living force, are very much going to come into play with the end, how they're going to solve the Lothal problems. Very much like it, and these are breadcrumbs that have been dropped throughout the seasons, especially too, which is these primitive force wielders in a way, like the wolves, the spiders, the Bendu are things that the Empire can't account for. So I feel like they're going to be key to the success of bringing back Lothal, and that Lothal itself wants Ezra to free it.
Well, remember what they said in this episode?
Mm-hmm.
The wolves are working for Lothal. Wasn't that the same as us? I hope so.
I hope so. Yes, exactly.
I'm